The rest of this video that you're about to watch is the entire digital program that I put together called the Waterfall Photographer's Guide, and I'm giving it away to you for free here on YouTube. This is going to walk you through everything you need to know about capturing waterfalls and taking them into post-production. So it's going to be a long video, but I promise you when you stick right through to the end, the feedback that I've had from this program has been amazing, and I'm so glad that I can now share this with you here on YouTube for you to enjoy and put into place. If you do find value in it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the like button as well. It really helps this video get further out into the world so that more photographers get to experience this amazing level of creativity that we all have. So what you're about to see is a much younger version of me, very different type of voice, but I'm filming it in New Zealand. So we're actually going to go to this incredible waterfall in New Zealand to walk you through every step of how to capture the right photographs for waterfalls, use filters in your imagery, and then take it into post-production. Some features of the editing might have changed because this was filmed a little while ago, but it is well worth a watch because the skills are still able to be adapted into the software versions that we have now and going forward into the future as well, no matter how much they change. So I really do hope you enjoy this and find really great value in it. I'll see you in New Zealand.
Welcome to McLean Falls on the South Island of New Zealand. I'm going to be showing you my in-the-field workflow for photographing and composing a waterfall. Let's get started.
Thank you for joining me here in this beautiful location in New Zealand. We are at McLean Falls, where we're going to learn a little bit about how to photograph waterfalls on location to get the best results before we go into the studio and do some post-processing. You may have read some debate online about the use of filters, but in this video, I'm going to be using a polarizing filter. You can use ND filters as well, but a polarizer is absolutely essential. There's three reasons why I use this sort of filter. The first is that it cuts glare. So the reflections and glare on the waterfall, on the foliage, everything around it, it gets cut out, which gives us much nicer images with less reflections. And then the second reason is when it cuts out that glare, it actually starts to saturate the colors. So I'll show you a little example in a second of how using a polarizer can saturate and remove the glare. It will saturate the image as well, giving you better colors in your raw files. Third reason is that they also act as usually 1 or 2 stop ND filters in front of your lens. So ND is neutral density, and that will just put a dark piece of glass in front of your lens, which will slow down your shutter speed, perfect for these sorts of waterfalls and these sorts of conditions. My personal choice here is NISI filters. I do use these because they're the easiest and I've got the best results from them. Although I have used other filters before which did give good results, but just not as good as what I am getting now with these filters. Firstly, I'm going to be shooting in manual mode. This is going to give me the control and flexibility I want to give me the best settings for the vision I have for this shot, which is lovely smooth water and beautiful green foliage, which we have around us right now. Once I've switched it into manual mode, I'm going to switch live view on. This is where I can start to actually see the image, check the polarization, and then start to adjust my settings. To give me a nice long shutter speed, I'm going to use a low ISO. The majority of cameras will have a native ISO of 100. Some do go down to 50, but 100 is going to give you the best dynamic range of your camera, as well as a low ISO to help slow down the shutter speed. Second thing is a good size aperture. So I'll probably be around f14 for this shot. And when I set that to f14, It's going to give me a nice depth of field and also let in less light to, again, help get that longer shutter speed. Third thing is what I said just before, is getting that longer shutter speed. So it's going to be at least a few seconds, especially because I've got a polarizer which is also doubling as an ND filter for me here on the front of my lens. So it'll give me a nice longer shutter speed, and I'll show you that as soon as I start setting up my settings. Now, just before I do that, I did say that you could try using a neutral density filter. If you're not in a completely enclosed rainforest like I am here, a neutral density filter is going to be good if the day isn't overcast like it is today. It's very, very cloudy, so there's not a lot of light around, which helps to expand our shutter time. But if you are in daylight, you can try using a neutral density filter. I do have a few myself, and I do sometimes use them, but in a majority of circumstances, especially in scenarios like this, you won't really need to use one. If you do decide to go ahead and use an ND filter, nothing more than 3 or 6 stops. As 10 stops, that's just going to make it a really, really long exposure, which is fairly unnecessary for most waterfalls. So this shot, I've got a shutter speed of 1.6 seconds. I just adjusted it to give me the correct light. Now, I do have a lens cloth here, and I really have to wipe the front of this lens because it's absolutely drenched at the moment. There's a lot of water spray and it's just started to rain. So before I take this shot, I just wanted to say don't go over about 20 seconds in your shutter speed. With motion in plants and blurring of certain elements in the frame, over 20 seconds is probably just going to be a bit too long for you. So I will just wipe my lens quickly, and I'm sure a lot more water is going to come onto it, but I will flick this over into video mode just quickly for you. And what I'll do is I'll just show you what the polarizer actually does. So as I spin it, you can see some of the lens moving, but you can see down the bottom, just down here, that this is really just starting to spin, and it cuts out so much glare. Now I can increase my ISO a bit here. This is just in video mode, but then you can see how much light you can get, and it makes a photograph look really amazing. Alright, so at the moment I've framed the shot with what you saw before. So it's got the waterfall, and then it's got this second waterfall up the top here. And then it's got these nice little elements. I could possibly go just a little bit wider to get some more rocks in the foreground down here. And I can try multiple compositions doing this. Another compositional tip you can do is, once you've got your foreground, your midground, your background, like I do here with the rocks, the first waterfall, and then the section up there, is go vertical as well. So for this shot, I'm just going to keep it in horizontal, and that's the one I'm going to be showing you in post-processing. But this one here, I'm just going to be keeping it as it is horizontal, and I've got my elements in the frame, so I'm going to focus just on the rocks down here to start with, and I'll focus, get my cable release ready, wipe my lens because it really, really needs it. And there's probably, it's very quick how fast the water builds up on this. So I'm just going to wipe it, keep it nice and handy, and take the shot as soon as I finish wiping it. So as I'm exposing, there's maybe 2 or 3 tiny little water drops. Now that I've got that shot in the bag, I'm going to actually pull it up on the camera and zoom in to check that I've got it nice and sharp, and that it is sharp from front to back, because I have got a nice big depth of field. And I'll do that right now by just pushing in and zooming in, checking each of the elements in the frame, the foreground, midground, and the background. And it's time to head back to the studio to get the post-processing section done.
going to be jumping into Lightroom and Photoshop to go through, decide, edit, and get our image looking like the final stage that we want it to. So this is going to be a little bit of technicality. You don't have to go the whole way through everything that I do, but there are some things in here that if you just do a few of these little things inside of Photoshop, it's going to make your image completely stand out from the rest. And this is how you get those absolutely perfect green rainforest colors inside of editing. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to jump in and we're going to look at these two images here. So inside this first one is a much wider shot. It's a bit darker, it's a little bit underexposed, and you can see here that it's just started to clip some of the blacks. However, I know that with a raw file I can bring some of that back. The second composition here is a lot tighter in, it's obviously a brighter exposure because we lifted the shutter speed here up to 3.2 seconds. The clouds came over a bit more, it just got a bit darker. So that's why it lifted that shutter speed. So the water is a little bit more fluid. You can see a little bit more of that motion in it. However, I'm actually quite partial to this 2-second exposure. So this is the one that we are going to work on. Now I am using a Wacom stylus here, and I will be using this the whole way through simply because it makes it a lot easier inside of Photoshop to be playing with some of these images. Alright, so this is absolutely raw, completely unedited, not even a camera profile added, so it's just the standard Adobe color. What we're going to do is inside the basic panel here first, I'm just going to go, this is the latest version of Lightroom however. If you don't have this version, camera calibration will be down here, and there will be a drop down menu like there is just here. So for this, for newer Lightroom users, we're going to go up here into the profile browser, come down to camera matching and hit landscape. So if I just look at a few of these, so this is neutral, this is landscape. It just brings out a few more of those vivid tones before we even do anything. So I'll go to that. Alright, and now we'll do a few basic things. First, let's set the white balance, and we'll set it properly based on the watercolor, because the water is the most important thing that we have in this shot. So I'm going to go up to crop. Now this might seem counterintuitive, but we're going to bring this completely down until it's nice and small. Don't need to rotate it or anything, not yet anyway. We'll do this and select an area of the waterfall that we can see. And if you look up here in the histogram, it's showing just the white balance and the color and the light inside of the cropped area. So because we can see that there's a little bit of yellow here that is too far down toward the left, we want to try and get this as grey as possible, as neutral grey as possible. So I'll just click on the temperature slider here. I'm just going to use the up and down arrow keys to bring that in. So these are only very, very minor adjustments. Now you can see here that there's quite a bit of green still there. So let's just bring up the magenta tone until that is nice and even. Now you can see that there's barely anything left visible there. Just bring this up a touch more, and there we go. So now that we've got the white balance set, we can hit reset. While we're inside the cropping menu as well, what I'll do is I will actually straighten this. So it was straight in camera, the spirit level showed it straight, everything like that, but the actual land was off, which sounds a bit funny, but the actual land was off. So we're just going to bring this a touch straighter. So that's probably a bit too far. I'm just looking at this line here until I get it to a nice even angle. And I know that this waterfall was slightly bent because it does go in an uphill motion. So I think we'll leave it as that. Now I will expand this just to bring that in so that we have as much real estate as possible within the shot. And I'll just bring that down to there a bit and increase that pull.
Okay, so there we go, we've got our cropped image, and if I just hit the backslash key for before and after, you can see that we've made very minor adjustments. Everything's just that touch warmer, tiny bit less green, but we're going to make sure that all of this gets worked out perfectly inside of Photoshop. Now we can work on just our basic panel. So I'm going to increase the exposure, probably around half a stop, just to bring out those vibrant colours and tones. The highlights here are just going to affect mainly the waterfall, so I'm not going to bring it right down because that just looks horrendous. It really just burns out our highlights and grays them out. So I'm just going to bring that down a bit so it brings in a bit more of that texture and tone in there. I'm going to boost the shadows so I can see all the nice details inside of here, and this is going to make the image look really flat. We are taking the contrast out of the shot with highlights and shadows. And that's probably a bit too much in the shadows, so we'll just bring that down to about 70. Now with whites and blacks, if you've seen any of the other post-processing tutorials, you'll know what I do here to set a perfect white point and a perfect black point so we get the full range of the histogram. Now I'm going to push the Option key, which is Option on Mac or Alt on PC, and you can see a tiny bit of white just in that really far top line. I'm going to bring this up until we just start to see a bit of that waterfall. So there we go, we can see that we've got a pure white point inside the waterfall. Bring that back ever so slightly, and there we go, we now have a pure white point which is the waterfall. This is blown out and that's not a big deal. Now we'll drop the blacks, so this is introducing contrast. You can see just on the left and right there. I'm going to bring it down just so a tiny bit is showing. We know that this is meant to be pure black anyway. I'm going to bring in actual contrast here and bring this up to about plus 30 or close enough. If I hit the backslash key, you can see what we have done. Now it has blown out these highlights just a touch, so I'm going to bring that down ever so slightly more. And then it just brings in those really nice details and tones. Clarity and dehaze, I'm going to leave those alone. Vibrance and saturation, I think there's enough of that in there already without even touching the slider. So good editing and good contrast skills, those are going to help you completely avoid the vibrance and saturation slider, which really create those oversaturated, sort of amateurish looking shots that we see most of the time on social media from people who are just hobbyists or general photographers. So what we'll do is we're going to skip tone curves, skip HSL, we're going to head to detail, and you can see it's a touch soft here. Just bring that up to about plus 50. We will do a much nicer version of sharpening inside of Photoshop. I will bring down the radius, that's just the finite details of how big the sharpening pixels are. Hold the Option key and just mask out the areas we don't need sharpened, which are dark shadows, the water. They're meant to be blurry or not seen. And as we select these, this mask, you can see white reveals, black conceals, and that's pretty much the general rule of Photoshop overall. We will bring up just a touch of noise reduction in luminance just to clear out any little pixels we may have. So next we'll go into lens corrections and we'll remove chromatic aberration. There shouldn't be any. If there is, it's gone. Enable profile corrections, and if you've got something like a Fujifilm camera, this does it all in camera. So by the time you import them, it automatically removes chromatic aberration, and profile corrections are built into the raw file. So you don't actually need to do any of this, which is really, really good, and just saves that extra step. So it removes vignetting, it removes all those extra things. Now with lens corrections, you can see what we've done here. It's taken away the vignette around the corners and just brightened up the whole image overall. Effects, we'll leave that alone until we get back into Lightroom from Photoshop. Now, this seems just a touch over, so I'll bring that down ever so slightly more. And we'll also just rotate that a tiny bit more. It just seems a bit too skewy for me. There we go. So I think I'm happy with that. Just a quick before and after. That's just where we've gotten to inside of Lightroom within a couple of minutes. Now, I'm explaining this, so it takes a little bit longer. However, when you're used to this, it's just a breeze. It's very fast, very quick, very easy.
Now let's get this inside of Photoshop to really get you going. To do that, you can either right click and say edit in, open in Adobe Photoshop, or as a keyboard shortcut, which I prefer to use, is Command E, which would be Control E on a PC. Give this a second to load up, and then we'll get into the Photoshop section. Okay, we are all loaded up inside of Photoshop here, and we are ready to go. The very first thing we want to do is we're going to leave the background layer alone. What we want to do is get rid of all these little distracting elements. So there's so many little tiny brown bits, and we want this to be a really lush green rainforest. So first thing I'm going to do is create a new layer, and I'm going to rename my layers as I go, simply for organization. I suggest you do this, although sometimes you just completely forget or simply too lazy to do it sometimes, which is perfectly fine as long as you know which layers are which. So I'm going to rename layer 1 to item removal and hit enter on that. Now first thing I'll do is I'm going to go up to the spot healing brush here, and that is J on the keyboard if you are interested, and I'll just zoom in and start removing these little bits. Command plus on the keyboard or Control plus on the keyboard, and I'm just using the Wacom tablet to go around these little brown leaves, and it does quite a good job for these small distracting elements that we really don't need in the frame. I'll just hold spacebar to move around, hold spacebar and click and drag, and I'll just get rid of this. It's really easy with this Wacom tablet. And I'll just remove the little brown bits. This may take sort of a few minutes, but it really does bring an extra edge into the image. You don't have to be 100% perfect here, simply because these are only very, very small, innocuous things that if you don't remove them, people will notice. If you do remove them, nobody will notice. So all that extra work, nobody's actually going to notice it except you. And we'll just keep removing these little items here. Once we get to the bigger items, I'll show you a few little tricks that we can do. And I'm just going through this really quickly. I normally take a little bit more time, but I don't want to bore you through this video. So we'll keep going and just removing these extra little items that we really don't need. You can use a lasso tool for this, and this is actually doing quite a good job. It's not 100% perfect, there's a little bit of softness in there, but overall I'm happy with how that is coming together so far. And just remove that little bit there, and now we're getting into something a little bit deeper, and there are still a few little elements that I would remove, and I will do that in the final shot. Little bits like this, and up here, this bright glaring distraction, so that is pretty well instantly gone. I'll just remove all those extra flares. Now this section here, this is where we can use the clone stamp tool. Now a thing to note is under item removal, because it is a new layer, we need to make sure sample all layers is ticked, so it samples from the background layer underneath it. Now we'll go to the clone stamp tool, which is S on the keyboard, and to use the clone stamp you need to sample from a different area. So let's go with hold Alt or Option, depending on which system you're on, and sample from an area. So let's just say we're going to sample from there. Now you can see a little preview of it, and that's going to start bringing up some of this. So let's say we want to just expand on the fern just here. We're going to sample from different areas as well. Now there will be some duplicate areas, simply because this is literally cloning parts over other parts. And all we want to do is try and match it up so it looks as close as possible. Now that's a bit too far there, so we'll just remove these extra little bits. just add that into there. And this is starting to come together. Every time I sample, I do just hold that little Alt or Option key. I'm just going to paint that bit over there so it looks a little bit more blended and even. And I'll just line that up like so. I can use my spot removal tool just in here to remove that extra little bit of branch. And now it looks like there's a bit of motion blur in there. It's not 100% perfect. You would probably spend a bit more time than I just did doing that, but let's go with this section. Whoops, still on the healing brush tool. So we'll just paint over that area there and just fill this in with a little bit of that extra fern detail so it looks a bit more realistic. And just paint in a few of these extra fern details in there. And again, this isn't 100% perfect, I know, but it looks pretty good. Now what we've done so far is, if I turn that off and on, you can see how much detail we've really saved in this area. If I zoom back in again, it's Command plus and Command minus to zoom in quickly. I'll select from that area and I can just paint straight down with the clone stamp tool. And same here. It's really just getting these textures and tones to match up, look nice and even, like so. So these just look like vines draping down. I'll add a little bit more in here. I'll undo that, Command Z to undo. Just spot removal that. You can use the lasso tool on here as well, but I'm just doing this as a very quick example for you. Now another thing we can use the clone stamp tool is to paint this area in. So you can see we've got a bit of a blue haze, and if I just go into the stamp, I'll make this brush smaller, and this is, to make this bigger and smaller, you just use these square bracket keys on the keyboard. Select Alt to sample and just paint in a little bit more of this black line area. I'll make this a touch bigger now and just drop that in there. Start to paint out this blue color cast, which we really don't want in the shot. And as you can see, I'm sampling from multiple areas, so it creates this realistic look. And if I turn that off and on, see this giant blue color cast has now gone away. There is a bit of a replicated pattern there, so we'll just drop that on there as so. Same thing with this area here. There's another blue color cast here. So we'll just paint over this and remove that. Now it looks nice, even, and not distracting. Go back to our spot removal and just remove these tiny little distracting elements that will take away from the shot if they were still there. And this, if you don't have a really fast computer, this may just lag a touch with spot healing brushes, but it will come around to it as you just keep doing more and more, and you get used to how fast your own computer works. Alright, so we're just about there with this section, and that's actually looking quite bad there, so I'm going to make a nice small brush. Probably brushed over that a bit too fast for the system to keep up. So I'm just using the clone stamp tool, painting in these extra pattern areas and diversifying a touch. So I'll grab a bit from the rock, grab a bit from the plant up here, and that's still a replicated pattern, so I'll just paint that out, and that's looking nice and natural. Back to spot removal, and we'll take care of these last few little elements. So this is another section where it's going to be a little bit trickier, but if you do it in small patches, just the spot healing brush can work for you. But I will go to the clone stamp tool. You do get quite used to this as you do it more and more. Now it is pretty much just black in that area, so there's not much extra that we'd need to paint in. It's just, you can tell that there's vines and plant roots and leaves and everything there, but we don't want to give it away too much. Alright, so that is probably still a bit of a distracting element, but I'll leave that there for now and get on with the rest of the tutorial. Okay, so with that item removal done, now we can actually start working on the rest of the image. What we've done so far is made this a non-destructive workflow. So if we completely deleted this layer, so if I turn it off, everything is still there. Nothing's been actually removed from the background. However, it has just been taken away in a separate layer. So we're working through that non-destructive workflow, and we're going to continue with that theme. First thing I want to do is I want to adjust the waterfall. I want to bring up the brightness without taking away from the detail that we've got inside of there. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to create a custom channel just for the waterfall. And if I bring up the channels tab inside of, or next to the layers, I can press on RGB, and that's got the full range of channels in there. If I press Command and click on RGB, or Control in the case of Windows, you can see how this selects around the brightest areas. This is a similar way to creating luminosity masks. So what we'll do is we'll come down here and click on Create New Channel. Just here, this is going to show our mask. And as I said before, white reveals, black conceals. So most of the waterfall is white. We've got bits and pieces up here, but I want to narrow it down even further. If I press Command, Option, Shift, and click on the mask again, you can see it refines it down again. If I click on Create New Channel, that's now going to bring down most of just the highlights. And then we can paint this out in an extra mask on top. So I pressed Command, Option, Shift. That would be Control, Alt, and Shift, and click on the newest mask, or the newest channel. With this selected, we're going to come back over into Layers, down here, and create a new Curves layer. Now this is going to come up with bright red. That shows the mask. You can just click on that. You can click back to the mask and hold Option if you want to see what the mask is actually selecting. So it's grayed out just about everything else. We can paint this extra section out if we wanted to, but I'll actually leave it in there. And what I'll do is I'll rename this Waterfall. Couldn't spell then, Waterfall, there we go. And now you can see that within this layer mask is just the histogram for that, so we can adjust the curves for just this region. If I pull it all the way down, you can see what we're really affecting. And that looked pretty horrible, but let's do it this way. So I'm going to pull the brightest areas up, so the brightest or highlights area is up the top, and we're just going to pull the black section down, and you can see how it pulls that detail back in while still giving a brighter version of the waterfall. So we want our eye to be drawn, we want the viewer's eye to be drawn to the brightest part of the photograph, in this case being the waterfall. So that's all I'm going to do there. It's just a very minor adjustment, but it really does make a difference. Now as we've brought that exposure up, it just shows the waterfall is a touch too blue. So we're going to create a new color balance layer, and instead of just moving the mask up, I'm just going to hold the Option key or Alt, and as I move my cursor you can see this little box with an arrow. If I click that, it's now going to connect this color balance layer to the waterfall layer, which will only reveal it on the waterfall mask. So this waterfall basically becomes its own master of a group. If I just double click on that, I'll say waterfall color, and there we go. So now let's go into the color balance section, and you can see here we've got cyan or red, magenta and green, and yellow and blue. So all I'm going to do is just click there, so that's highlighted, and just bring up the magenta tone, the warm tone, sorry, a touch. So if I turn it off and on, Hasn't really done much. It's just a tiny little incremental adjustment. It probably seems a touch too green as well, so I'll bring in a couple of little magenta tones. And there we go. So if we turn it off and on, you can see it barely made a difference, but it just makes sure that white is really white. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do on the waterfall at this stage right now. And if I turned all of these off, it goes back to that background layer. So we are working in a non-destructive workflow. It's exactly what we want. Okay, so we're going to work on all the areas around this section. And this is where we're going to create a new curves layer. But what we'll do is, with this mask selected for the waterfall, I'm going to hold Alt or Option, click and drag up to curve. So now this is just highlighting the waterfall section. So if I hold Option, click on that, you can see what it's highlighting. Mostly the waterfall and this region up here again. If I press Command I or Control I, that's going to invert that mask so that the outside areas are the ones selected. Although with this, it's not 100% how I would like it yet. With the mask still selected, I'm going to come up to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. You can press Command L on the keyboard if you prefer, but I just like to do it that way. So I'm going to bring up the blacks, or the black point, which in this case is the brightest white point. And then I can increase the mid-tone area as well, so it takes away some of those slightly brighter areas and just leaves us with mostly the darker sections. Hit OK, and that's going to apply directly to the mask, which is really, really quick, easy, and quite targeted in terms of what we want. So let's rename this to Shadows Adjustment, and now we can get adjusting on our curves. So what I'll do is I'll bring up sort of the quarter tone, the top quarter tone region, just so it brings up that overall brightness, and then bring down the black region so it adds contrast and colour while keeping integrity and details within the sort of mid-tony or quarter tone region, and keeping the blacks nice and dark. So if I turn it off and on, you can see how I've really added that contrast. It's got a little bit of extra in the waterfall. So what I can do is just go to a paintbrush, B on the keyboard, select black, which will be my foreground color. I can press X just to switch that over, and just paint out. Actually, I'll turn my opacity up here to 100%. Just paint out that extra detail that I didn't want removed. Just adjust my brush size as I go. Just make sure I'm painting around the areas that I don't want to lose detail in. And that is in this really pure white area that we've been working on so hard to try and keep perfect. And I'll just remove it a little bit from some of these slightly brighter areas because it seems to have pulled down those ones as well. So if I turn that off and on, you can see what we've done and how it's really just affected mostly the shadows and added saturation through contrast. The next thing we're going to do is something that is absolutely phenomenal for rainforest, waterfalls, whatever it may be. This technique is really, really fantastic. So we're going to create another color balance layer, and I'm going to attach it. Oops, there we go. Attach it to the below layer, which is the shadow adjustment. So we're going to call this green tone. And this may seem just a little bit counterintuitive, but if I add in more blue, you can see how everything goes green, which seems strange, but it works. And if I turn that off and on, you can see how everything seems to have gone yellow, or green and blue. Turning it off and on seems to just change that color, and it is perfect. So we're going to adjust this yellow toning in the image, which we didn't really notice just in general,
but we're going to make that really, really pure green. If I turn that off and on, you can see what it's really done there. Now, it has affected some areas and made it blue, so I will add a touch of warmth in there, which does saturate those green tones a touch more as well. And if I turn that off and on, you can see how much of a difference we've really made. However, I don't like what it's done down here with these rocks. So, what I'm going to do, come down to, or go to my white layer mask on the green tone adjustment, make sure I have black selected. When I press Control and Option on the same time on the keyboard and click, I can see the hardness and the size of my brush if I really want a quick hardness or softness adjustment. So this is a really soft brush, probably about 10%, and opacity is up at 100%. And all I'll do is I'm just going to paint out where it's gone green on these yellow rock tones that I really like to have in there, which just gives colour separation. And you can see how it just brings that extra little bit of life back into photograph while we're not affecting so much of the extra colours that we've done. Now there is a tiny bit in here I just want to paint out, just in this region around here. And I know that we are in shadow area and that they are blue, but they've just gone a touch too green for me. And we'll just paint out these extra little areas. So if I turn that off and on, you can see how much of a huge difference this has made in one simple quick adjustment. We will be doing a couple more things. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a bit of a flare in here. So you can see it's got this bit of a blue tone again, but we're going to counteract that with a warm flare. First thing I'll do is I'm going to create a group. I'm going to rename this group to Flare. Inside of it, I'm going to make 3 brand new layers. I won't rename them because I know that they are all flares and I know which order they're in. So I'll select all of them, just hold Shift and click to select all 3 layers. Change the blend mode up here to soft light. So this is going to take away that real paint look and it's just going to make nice soft adjustments to these layers and whatever we paint onto them. So it's going to feather and spread the paint adjustment. So we're going to go here onto our layer 1, and what we need to do here is we're selected on the brush tool, come down to the color wheel or color adjustment. It may look different depending on how you've got your Photoshop set up, and I want to get a nice warm tone. So I'm just looking down here at what tones it's giving me. So I want that sort of nicer warmish golden color rather than a salmon. So we'll go something around here. Hit OK. Get a nice big brush using the square bracket keys or that Control and Option click that I showed you just before. I'm going to make the hardness 0%. I'm going to change the opacity down to 20%. So that's nice and soft. So you can just hit 1, 2, 3, 4 for corresponding 10, 20, 30, 40% on the keyboard. But we'll leave this at 20%. Nice soft brush, selected on layer 1. Blend mode is soft light. I'm just going to paint up here. So we'll do a nice little circle there. What we're going to do is select layer 2, increase our brush size, change the opacity down to 15% or so. Adjust our color. If we bring it slightly more towards the white, it becomes slightly more desaturated. And we're going to, again, paint over that. Layer 3, we change the opacity to 10%, so I just hit 1 on the keyboard. And this is going to be getting close to a white. So we're going to leave it a slightly yellower tone. Increase brush size again. And just paint that over there. Now you can see this effect quite obviously. If I turn off and on, it really gives you a difference of how much that look really helps in adding flair and interest and visual interest to the shot.
We can tone this down if we wanted to, so just select the group layer. You can decrease that all the way to 0 and just bring it up. So I'm a fan of overdoing it and then increasing the opacity or decreasing the opacity to suit the look. So at 75%, if I turn it off and on, you can see that it looks really good. It's taken away the largest majority of that blue tone. We've got everything that we need in there, add a bit of visual interest, a bit of flair, a bit of color separation, and it looks really, really good. Now, we've got all of this selected, and on our very top layer, which in this case is the group, I'm going to press Command, Option, Shift, E, which is Control, Alt, Shift, E on a PC. I'm going to change this to Sharpen. And what we'll do is this creates a layer of everything we've done so far. So this sort of locks in everything that we've done. So this is where it just takes away from that non-destructive workflow in adding sharpening, which is why I always do it as the very last thing we do. So with sharpen layers selected, I'm going to come up here to Filter, Other, and High Pass. Because this was taken on a Canon 6D and it's around that 20 megapixel shot, we have reduced it a little bit with the rotation that we did before. I'm going to sort of go between 1 and 3, so I'll probably stick around 1.7 for this and just hit OK. Now high pass filters are going to sharpen the mid-tone details, giving really nice mid-tone sharpness contrast in the shot. And what we'll do is go into, once that's done and applied, go to the blend mode and switch it to overlay. So this is just going to apply it to those mid-tone areas that needed sharpening. And if we zoom in, you can see if I turn it off and on, really makes a big difference in all of these fine little details. This is probably a bit too much. But as I said, we can always tone down the opacity. So if I press Command 0, go back to full screen, first thing I want to do is I actually want to add a layer mask to this layer. If I go down to the waterfall layer, the shadows adjustment layer, because that's our inverted mask, we don't really need to sharpen all of this. So if I click on that, drag it up to the sharpen layer, holding Alt while I click and drag, let it go. That's now going to take away the mask application to the waterfall. So if I turn it off and on, you can see it does absolutely nothing to the waterfall, which is perfect for what we need. We don't need to sharpen details that don't need sharpening. The water is soft and meant to be soft. And overall, this is looking like an absolutely fantastic image. If I hold the Alt or Option key and just click on the background layer, you can see where we've come from. We've then removed items and done item removal, adjusted the waterfall, and then adjusted the waterfall color. Now that's a very, very subtle adjustment, I have to say, but it does still add that extra bit of tonality. If I hit the shadow adjustments, you can see that it darkens those shadow areas but increases that brightness. And then we went from this yellowy tone to this gorgeous green, lush rainforest tone. The last few things we did were add that flare, take away that blue sort of color cast up there, and add a bit more visual interest to the top of this image. And then finally, we added sharpening to really crisp out those details and add in that extra level of sharpness that we need. So you could print this shot nice and big, however you need, however you wanted to, and this would come out looking fantastic. So what we'll do from here is we're going to save it, just Command S or Control S on a PC. That's then going to save this file directly back over into Lightroom, where we will finish off with one final adjustment. Alright, so this is saved back into Lightroom now. We're going to make a final little adjustment in here, and this is the last thing that I do to every shot. If I come down to the effects panel inside the develop module, just add a little bit of a vignette. So that closes in the outside edges, darkens them just enough to then draw the eye further into the frame. So if I turn this off and on, you can see what it's really done. It's taken away that extra bright area, just sort of up here, down here, over here, and draws your eye even further into the waterfall, through the shot, looking up the waterfall and into this gorgeous bright area. So you're sort of locked within this frame section, which is really, really nice. Okay, so just to give you an overall idea of what we've done from where we started, this is the absolute before image. This is completely raw. So we've gone from here, where it's dark, underexposed, it is just sort of a flat looking shot, to this, which is bright, vibrant, draws your eye in and looks absolutely magnificent. Thank you so much for watching the tutorial. I really do appreciate you buying this. I hope you've enjoyed coming, feeling like you've been coming on location with me inside New Zealand. You've learned a lot about actually the process of photographing the waterfall and then getting it into the studio or back home, post-processing it, drawing out those really gorgeous colors and really making it a visually appealing shot without having to add new elements. It's just simple contrast, colors, adjustments, sharpening to draw out the perfect shot as you've seen it when you're taking it on location. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next e-course.
I so hope you enjoyed that video. I was so glad to be able to share it with you. If you found value in it, I'll give you a quick reminder to hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe and follow for more. There's also another digital program that I've released here on YouTube called focal length blending. You're welcome to go and watch that. Video's just up here, so make sure you head over and check that one out too.